Hello and welcome to the podcast. This is Ron's Amazing Stories. We have stories that should thrill you a little and chill you a little.
It's amazing.
What you'll hear are adventures sent in by you guys, classic stories from the pulp mags, and episodes from the golden age of radio. We have special segments like Ghost Stories with Sylvia.
That's amazing.
And These Are Your Stories. So settle in for the next hour and enjoy the show. One more thing. You just might want to prepare yourself to be taken away from today.
Another 5-minute mystery.
This 5-minute mystery is being brought to you by none other than me.
Last week it was OP, now you, BG?
I thought I would have a go.
At what?
Sponsoring.
Okay,
You see, Ron, you need help.
we all do.
Yes, but you're so dumb that you tried to put M&M's in alphabetical order.
Oh boy.
Carol, you've got to get it from Uncle John. I need that money like I've never needed anything.
Look, Alex, Dad won't just hand me $5,000 like that.
But for Pete's sake, Carol, what am I going to do?
I want Mrs. Beeston to hear you.
Oh, Mrs. Beeston, that snoopy housekeeper. I don't care who hears me. I've got to have...
Carol! There, you fool, she did hear you. In here, Mrs. Beeston. Oh, Miss Carol, something terrible has happened. Your father. Dad, what is it, Mrs. Beeston? What's happened? In the library. Your father. He's just been shot.
The room is just as you found it. You haven't touched a thing.
That's right, Inspector. Everything is just as it was.
You three were the only ones in the house, I understand.
Yes, just Alex, Mrs. Beeston, our housekeeper, and myself.
I see. Come out here for the weekend, young man?
Why, no. Carol and I had a little business.
Mrs. Beeston, I understand you discovered the murder.
Yes, I was just going upstairs when I heard voices in the library. I hesitated a minute because I didn't know Mr. Ormsbury had a visitor. And then I heard the shot. I ran in just as a man was jumping over the railing of the patio. Mr. Ormsbury was dead.
And this gun, you say, was lying just outside that French window on the patio?
Yes, Inspector. The window was open. And when I went to close it, I saw the gun.
I see. This bruise across the victim's temple has me puzzled. If there was no struggle, and there are obviously no signs of one, where did the bruise come from?
Oh, I think I can explain that, Inspector. When I first ran in, my first thought was to get Mr. Ormsbury to that couch. I just had lifted him out of the chair, and the horrible sensation ran through me that he was dead. I let go suddenly, and his face fell hard against the desk. When I picked him up, his forehead was bruised.
I see. I can understand your shock, Mrs. Beeston.
Yes, Inspector. The whole thing was so unreal, I could scarcely believe it.
Look here, Inspector, I can't see that much headway is being made. All the while we're standing here, my uncle's murderer is getting farther and farther away.
Oh, I wouldn't say that exactly. I'd say he was getting much closer.
Closer? Inspector, you don't mean that...
That I know who did it, Miss Ormsbury. Yes, that's exactly what I mean.
But that's impossible, Inspector. I saw the man myself escape through that window.
There was no man, Mrs. Beeston, and you know it. I'm arresting you, Mrs. Beeston, for the murder of your employer.
Why did the inspector arrest Mrs. Beeston? Do you know the clue? In a moment, we'll have the solution. But first...
Well, another unsolvable crime.
I know how the detective knew.
Of course you do.
It's all in the bruise.
I'm listening.
Dead men to tell tales.
That's not my experience.
Yes, well, you would try to drown a fish.
What?
You're so lame that you stared at the orange juice carton because it said, concentrate.
Hey now.
When you saw the sign, under 17 not admitted, at the movies, you went out and got 16 friends.
I only did that once.
And now, back to our story.
But, Inspector, I don't see what Mrs. Beeston said that leads you to accuse her.
Plenty, Miss Ormsbury. But the thing that really gave her away was her explanation of how the bruise came to be on the victim's face. Mrs. Beeston explained it by saying that the bruise occurred when she dropped the body against the desk. What Mrs. Beeston didn't know when she cooked up that story was Dead bodies do not bruise. Obviously, the victim was struck on the temple to render him unconscious before the death shot was fired. And now, Mrs. Beeston, I think you'll agree with me, sometimes dead men do tell tales. Come along. We've got a ride to headquarters.
Well, I guess dead men do tell tales.
Wherever possible.
How did you know?
How didn't you know?
I know. You're gonna say when I missed the number 44 bus, I took the number 22 bus twice.
I would never say that. I would say, you think Taco Bell is where you pay your phone bill.
It's that you say?
Hello, and welcome to the podcast. On the show today, we have a theme of sorts. We're going to review an audiobook all about the life and times of James McParland. Who is that, you might ask? Well, he was just one of the many great detectives that worked for the Pinkerton National Detective Agency. Then, we have some crazy stories sent in by you, for you. A bike ride through a cemetery has issues. A floating ghost, and why not, a Bigfoot disappears. Our featured story comes from the OTR series, Cavalcade of America. It will tell of the man, the myth, and the detective, Alan Pinkerton himself. I think you're going to enjoy it. So settle in for this Audible book review. Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories. The Private Detective. Hollywood has had its fun with these guys. Famous authors have written bestsellers and have led readers on many adventures and mysteries. But there are more to private eyes than long trench coats and the snapping of images of cheating spouses under a streetlight at night. It has a robust and rich history. Investigators have gone as far back as the ancient Sumerian times, but the actual birth of the Private Investigation Agency is more recent. In 1833, a French soldier named Eugene Francois Vidocq founded the first private detective agency. It was called, and I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce this,
Le Bureau de Renseignement,
or the Office of Intelligence. Eugene developed criminology, record-keeping, and ballistics. He was also the first to use plaster cast creation. All in all, a true pioneer. Then we move on to Alan Pinkerton. In 1840, he was appointed the first detective in Chicago, Illinois. Shortly after that, he joined up with Edward Rudker, a Chicago lawyer. Together, they formed the Pinkerton National Detective Agency. Pinkerton also headed up the Union Intelligence Service during the Civil War. This agency is now known as the United States Secret Service. The agency continues on today under the name Pinkerton Consulting and Investigations. So what is our audiobook about? It is titled Pinkerton's Great Detective, The Amazing Life and Times of James McParland. Here's an introduction to the book.
The gravestone stands in an open area, unprotected by trees and exposed to the blustery snow flurries and frigid winds that regularly rake north-central Colorado. Near the top of this granite marker is a single name, McParland. Below is a record of the supposed birth and death dates of a man once so widely recognized that when his admirers referred to him as the Great Detective, others instantly knew of whom they spoke. But James McParland surely would have chuckled at the dates on his tombstone, for throughout his life, this master of evasion, obfuscation, and at times outright deceit maintained that he didn't know when he had been born. So was this the long-hidden truth finally appearing? Had his widow ordered this particular date for reasons of her own? Or was it another instance of the elusiveness and ambiguity that marked McParland's entire life? Any could be the answer, because it's impossible to be sure about McParland, who relished being a man of mystery. Confusion even surrounds his name. Originally, it was McParlin, and he only added the D midway through life, while other spellings and aliases were also used at times. Throughout his career, he delighted, even when under oath, in evading questions and offering only vague and sometimes contradictory information. According to one attorney, he was the most skillful, cunning man, the most unfair witness that I ever saw on the stand. Because of the uncertainty he engendered as a witness, aspersions cast about his behavior and morals during investigations, his creation and perpetuation of myths about himself, and that few of his reports or letters have survived, it has proven difficult through the years to make a full assessment of McParland. But what is certain is that few people have undergone such a dramatic fall from grace after death, such a change from idol to villain. There is, and long has been, little middle ground about McParland. He has been perceived as a great American hero. If there ever was a man to whom the people of this county should erect a monument, it's James McParland, said one contemporary. Others have reviled him as the worst kind of scoundrel, a perjurer who twisted testimony to send innocent men to the gallows, a man with the bearing of a brute and the visage of a vulture, his hands befouled with blood, venomous as a viper, a beastly snarl on his forbidding lips. He stalks the streets a thing unclean, hated by all. Widely varying depictions still abound in books and film even a century after his death, many making up for a lack of depth, balance, and accuracy with emotive language and unsubstantiated allegations. So who was the real man behind the contrary portraits? Courageous hero or contemptible rogue? Throughout his career, McParland was a controversial figure for the equally contentious Pinkerton's National Detective Agency. In fact, a significant part of that company's reputation, good and bad, was based on his triumphs and failures. McParland first gained fame for his undercover role in the breaking of the Molly Maguires in the Pennsylvania coal fields in the 1870s, a tale that concluded with 20 men being hanged. He returned to center stage 3 decades later for his role in the attempt to convict a trio of leaders of the Western Federation of Miners, WFM, for the assassination of former Idaho Governor Frank Steunenberg. Between those cases, he rose steadily in the Pinkertons' hierarchy, eventually managing the agency's operations west of the Mississippi River. He was a key figure in the investigation of the first known murder by mail and helped solve the theft of $280,000 of gold from a San Francisco smelting works. He oversaw the efforts of legends such as the charismatic cowboy detective Charlie Siringo, the incorruptible lawman Doc Shores, and the cold-blooded killer Tom Horn. He supervised operations to catch murderers, train robbers, and con men, including swindlers who targeted the Lord Mayor of London, a band accused of attempting to murder New Mexico politicians, and the Wild Bunch, led by Butch Cassidy. McParland was so despised that one socialist journalist wrote of how he followed him for days in order to murder him. Yet his adventures so intrigued Sir Arthur Conan Doyle that in 1914, the author gave the detective the highest of compliments by having him meet Sherlock Holmes in one of his novels. Thus, the story of the great detective is marked by widely varying opinion, belief, interpretation, and assessment, yet it's one that has never been told before in all its component pieces. What follows here is that tale, one of paradoxes, ambiguity, and mystery. It can be seen as a story of duplicity or honor, of good or evil, of morality or treachery, of a hero or a villainous brute. It's the story of the conundrum that was James McParland.
Both action-packed and meticulously researched, Pinkerton's great detective brings listeners along on McParland's most challenging cases. From the infiltration of the murderous Molly Maguire's gang to his hunt for the notorious Butch Cassidy and the Wild Bunch. Filled with outlaws and criminals, detectives and lawmen, Pinkerton's great detective shines a light upon the celebrated secret agency and its premier sleuth. This is a wonderful story of the Pinkerton Agency and its notorious detective. The narration is top-notch and the stories told are amazing. It is said that the days of the private detective are long gone, but their history is truly fascinating. And perhaps no other man but James McParland embodies the life of the private detective. This guy truly was the turn of the century's James Bond. I highly recommend Pinkerton's Great Detective, The Amazing Life and Times of James McParland. Now, does that interest you at all? If it does, here's what Audible has set up for us. They are offering a free audiobook and 30 days to give you the opportunity to check out the service. You can stream or download thousands of included audiobooks, podcasts, and Audible originals in the Plus catalog. There is so much to do at Audible that you'll never run out of content. So, to download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories. Thank you, Audible. And now, let's get to a few of your stories.
These are your stories, sent by you, for you.
Our first story this time comes from a graveyard in Seminole, Pennsylvania. It was sent in by Robert Little. I have titled this one, Day Ghosts at the Cemetery. Hello, Ron. I heard you asking for ghost stories, and I have quite a few. I don't know what it is about me, but ghosts and strangeness seems to follow me wherever I go. I ride my bike a lot. I normally don't ride through graveyards, but I'd heard that there was one close to home that was haunted by the ghosts of little children. I decided to check it out. Like I said, I was riding my bike through the graveyard along a little road that cut through it. It was a hot summer day. I had an ice-cold bottle of water in my hand. The bottle slipped and I tried to catch it. Of course, I lost control of my bicycle and tumbled into the grass. As my bike crashed down, I heard the laughing of children. I assumed some kids were there and saw me fall down. They continued to laugh as I stood up and wiped off the grass and dirt. As I gathered my bike and belongings, I looked towards where the sounds were coming from. All I could see was a round bush with one skinny tree trunk. That was where the sounds were coming from, but under the bush were no feet. I got up and walked around and searched for the laughing children. There was no one behind that bush, and no one else in the graveyard. From where I stood, I could see for hundreds of yards all around me, and the closest living person was on the other side of the graveyard, looking down at a gravestone. I walked over to him and asked if he had heard the children. He looked up to me and vanished before my very eyes. I've not been back to that graveyard ever since. People who say that ghosts only come out at night are very wrong, and I can tell you for sure that the Whitesburg Presbyterian Cemetery is, in fact, haunted. Thank you for your show, and thank you for sharing my story. Robert Little, Seminole, Pennsylvania. Robert, that is a crazy story. I've always contended that the paranormal should never be limited to night. My own shadow story took place in broad daylight, so I agree with you 100%. There are a lot of reasons to hunt ghosts at night. The world quiets down as the day fades away. Some locations only let you enter after the close of daytime business hours. Also, it's much creepier at night. Thank you for your story, Robert. Our second story was sent in by Grub81. Sorry, that's all I got. I have titled this story, Mr. Ghost and Mr. Chicken. Hey Ron, I'll make this as short as possible. I know you're looking for ghost stories. Here's my one and only one. I had the chicken pox in the 3rd grade. My mom was fine with me staying up and watching TV since I'd be missing school for a week or so. One night, about 2 a.m, I was watching Andy Griffith. I hear a slight moan come from the hall. I look up, and a woman passes by my doorway. It was not my mother, and she, didn't really walk. She floated almost gracefully. She had long white hair, and my mother's hair was dark brown. Her lower jaw was gaping open, and she had 2 dark voids where her eyes should have been. Oh, and no feet. No feet at all. I ran to my parents' room and slept on their floor for the rest of the night. It frightened me at the time and still gives me a chill when I think of it to this day. I know what I saw, and it was proof enough to me that spirits are around. Grub 81. Well, Grub, I have no explanation for what you saw, and I can guess what everyone around you told you at the time. Thank you for sharing your story with us. Our last story comes from Bram, Ireland. That's his name, not where he lives. Bram lives in Kentucky, but didn't leave which city. Here is his story that he has titled, I Saw It, and Then It Just Vanished. Me, being 12 or 14 at the time and still loving the woods and marshy area that we lived in. That is until I was utterly confused by what I saw. So, our house borders an old Indian reservation. They're gone now, not sure why, but you get the gist. Me and my brothers, being kids, we loved to explore, building forts, and playing war in the woods. Stuff like that was always fun. While in the middle of moving some large branches to build a makeshift fort, I and him are distracted by some movement about 40 feet away. My brother points and says, "Look." It's not what I see that confuses, but how it all played out. I see a hairy brown figure, roughly 8 feet tall, moving pretty fast, like a casual jog. This got me stuck in my tracks, and I couldn't move. As I watched it, it suddenly looped around a tree and just vanished into thin air behind the tree. After that, me and him run over to the tree, looking up, looking down, looking around. There's no place it could have possibly gone, but it was gone. To date, family and friends don't believe us. But what I want to know is, Ron, what do you think? Bram, Ireland. What do I think? Well, Bram, it sounds like a Bigfoot encounter to me. So many theories surround the big guy, and so many different types of tales out there, it's hard to track down just what he is. I do know that recent lore suggests that Bigfoot is a magical beast capable of moving in and out of dimensions. Others suggest that he is an alien creature with abilities that we just can't comprehend. Me, I still like to think that Bigfoot is nothing more than an elusive humanoid creature. Thank you for your story, Bram. It's a pretty good one. Do you have a story that you want to tell on the show? If you do, we want to hear it. It can be about any subject and from any genre. Heck, it doesn't even have to be true. Original fiction or stories from the public domain are quite welcome. To submit them, head to ronsamazingstories.com and click on the story submission banner. Fill out the form, and soon your story will be heard on the show. Do you have a story but don't want to write it? That's okay too. Just leave your contact information, a brief description of your story, and I'll get back to you. We can write it together. However, if you don't do it, your story remains just that, your story. Why not share it with the world and make it our story? Our featured story this week goes along quite nicely with our audiobook review. It is titled Alan Pinkerton. It comes from the OTR series Cavalcade of America. The show was sponsored by the DuPont Company, and it was intended to improve DuPont's public image after World War I. More about that later. The company's motto was, "Maker of better things for better living through chemistry." This series documented historical events using stories of individual courage, initiative, and achievement. It was originally broadcast on radio from 1935 to 1953, and later on television from 1952 to 1957. Originally on CBS, then later on NBC. Our story tells the little-known event that actually saved Abraham Lincoln's life. It is titled Alan Pinkerton, and it first aired on February 13th, 1939.
The Cavalcade of America, presented by DuPont. Of the many distinguished immigrants who have come to America, none contributed so much that was vital and necessary in our expanding era than a man who fought lawlessness and injustice long before the days of scientifically specialized criminal detection. With his great and ingenious brain and his fervent zeal, he was one of the original contributors to the permanent enforcement of law and order among our people. His name was Alan Pinkerton. The story of a Scotch lad named Alan Pinkerton, who was born in the little town of Gobble and later founded the first dynasty of private detectives in America, supplementing the official forces of law and order with an uncanny system of criminal detection, and in whose story occurs the little-known incident that resulted in the saving of the life of Abraham Lincoln. Very early in life, Alan Pinkerton received his first impression of the dark terror of lawlessness. He was only 9 years old. The Pinkerton family was then living in Glasgow, where Alan's father was a sergeant of police. And one night in the murky streets of the old city...
Come. Hurry. Aye, at once. Time. Ready?
Aye.
Tell your man we're on our way to the square.
Aye, I will.
We'll hear rights. Let no one stop us. Not even the police come.
Hurry. There's not much time.
Aye.
Stop! All of you! Back to your homes!
Out of the way, Sergeant. Out of the way, we'll hear rights.
Your rights do not lie in this direction. Disperse to your homes.
Pass them over. Right, kill him. Knock him down.
Now you may go over me, but you're not to pass me. There'll be no...
Oh, wait, you! Then I hit him again. Have you not done enough knocking him down like that?
Who are you?
My name's Alan Pinkerton. Stand aside,
Get out of the way. Don't be a wee fool.
Fool! You're the fool. All of you cowards. Who has a better friend of poor folk than a policeman? And you would kill him.
We didn't mean to kill.
Then stand to one side and let me take my father home.
That's the beginning of our story. Its criminal thread doesn't resume again for some time. But Alan Pinkerton was never to forget that night when a Scottish mob overpowered his father and crippled him for life. And from that moment, a passionate conviction was born in him that law and order must be maintained. Until he was 23, Pinkerton led a useful but uneventful life. He was an apprentice cooper and learned his trade thoroughly. But soon after his marriage, like other young men in the British Isles, Pinkerton sailed for the land across the sea, and with his young bride turned his face to our western frontier.
You might have found work in Detroit, Alan.
Aye. But there'll be more work further west. Up there!
Well, our wagon always make that noise. It sounds like some wild thing.
They don't, but it will. They call these Conestoga wagons. Wooden axles and all. And they have the reputation of being very noisy.
Alan, must we go all the way to Chicago?
Ah, tut lass. 'Tis no more than 300 miles. Up! Up there!
The further we find Pinkerton penetrating westward, the closer he came to the conditions of disorder and lawlessness of the frontier America of the 1840s. This was an era of bad money in the West. Counterfeiters and coiners grew on every bush, and there were no agencies other than the local police forces to cope with them. It was a bewildering time for tradesmen and farmers alike. This wave of counterfeiting began to arouse Pinkerton's boyhood hatred of injustice and lawlessness. He'd gone from Chicago to Dundee, Illinois, and there set up as the town's first cooper with no thought of becoming a detective. But one day, while he was at the local blacksmith shop, a stranger drove up.
Hi there! Whoa!
Howdy, folks.
Hi, stranger.
Well, I can't let her live. Say, you fellas know where Mr. Crane resides?
Crane? Just a minute, Steve. I can point out the way to this gentleman. Just you go ahead outside, mister, and I'll show you what you want to know.
Well, now, I certainly would appreciate that.
Steve, isn't Crane the man that was mixed up in that horse stealing a while back?
Well, Alan, that's what they say.
Fine. That's all I want to know.
Now, mister, just point out the way to Crane's.
You sure somebody else wouldn't do just as well?
What you mean? You dealing the stuff?
I do when I can get first-rate stuff. I work it off in my hands when I pay off Saturday night.
That's the way. I got first-rate stuff if you're a square man.
You've been dealing with Crane, haven't you?
Yes, but Crane's got sort of poorly. Don't seem to take no interest. I could use a no man.
That's me. What you charge?
Well, I'll let you have $1,000 for $250.
Oh, that's high.
No, not for this it ain't. Can't tell this from the real thing.
I'll tell you what. Meet me at the new church over at Elgin, about 5 miles from here. It's nae finished yet, and I'll see you there at 4 tomorrow afternoon.
At home back in Vermont, I'm a mighty steady churchgoer. I'll have to remember to tell the deacon I helped dedicate a church back here in Illinois.
It's a deal, then?
Well, looks like it's going to be. The deal was put through, the defrauded merchants putting up the necessary money. Pinkerton's object was to trap Craig while he was carrying a large sum of counterfeit money in his pockets. The Vermonter was too smooth for him. When the arrest was made, Craig's pockets were empty. It was not an entirely successful conclusion to his first case, but Pinkerton was not through yet. This work brought him in touch with influential friends, and the first result was Pinkerton's appointment as deputy sheriff. The second called him to Chicago to act as that growing city's first and at that time only detective, and finally to the setting up of his own agency. Certain of the original rules of that agency, first set down in 1850, still stand as a criterion of what such rules should be.
So you want a job with me, do you?
I'd like it, Mr. Pinkerton. What are the rules?
Well, the first one is no gratuity of any kind.
Oh, I don't take bribes.
I'm not talking about bribes. If I thought you'd take one, you'd be out of this office now. I mean any tip from a client for extra service. And more than that, I mean any reward. You work for your pay, and that's all.
Well, I guess I can stand that.
There's no guessing about it. You'll have to. And furthermore, I don't want any operative of mine to ask for or to have any personal publicity. It just gives their names and pictures to the crooks they're after.
I see. Well, is that all, Mr. Pinkerton?
Well, it's all I can think of offhand. Now, do you still want to work as one of my operatives?
I wouldn't be here if I didn't.
That's the spirit. Plain talk does it. You're hired.
Unlike a good detective story, the story of a good detective lacks a well-rounded plot. Pinkerton's life was one of thrills, pursuits, strange, exciting episodes, each a story in itself. There was a famous case in which the ingenious mind of Alan Pinkerton was called upon to solve a mysterious murder. It begins in Columbia, Tennessee, where Pinkerton is talking with the local town banker.
Well, you see, Mr. Pinkerton, all this happened over a year ago. The cashier murdered, and the vault opened and rifled.
Mr. Taylor, did your cashier sleep in the bank building?
Yes, Mr. Pinkerton. He was too faithful. I noticed the bank hadn't been open that morning because Carter, that's the cashier, usually opened it early. When I went in, there he lay.
And no one has ever been suspected?
Well, I've suspected one man, yes. There's been no gossip. This man, Slocum is his name, was Carter's best friend. I went to him, but he wouldn't come. Wouldn't even look at the body.
Is there anything else?
Yes. I noticed that some papers had been burned in the fireplace of the bank, but I could make out Slocum's name.
What kind of paper?
It seemed to be a note for a big sum.
Has Slocum ever been in the bank since the murder?
Never.
How does he occupy himself? What does he do?
He's turned hermit. Never comes out of his house. Meets no one. And he's had plenty of time to destroy any evidence, if there is any.
I see. Well, there's one thing he can't destroy, and that's his conscience. The time will come when he'll need to talk to someone. And that's the time we'll get him.
Pinkerton sent for his operative Green and hired a man and woman to act as manservant and maid in Slocum's house. They watched him carefully as the days passed, and finally one night, after being alone for hours, Slocum started up to bed.
I'm going to bed. You can lock up now, Martha.
All right. Good night, sir.
Good night. Slocum? What? Slocum? What's that? Did anyone call me? Slocum? What is it? What is it? Confess. Confess? What? Who is it? Carter. 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 No! No! No!
In the gray of the next morning, Pinkerton was awakened by Slocum's manservant, Binney, who told him that the suspected murderer was rushing to escape on an early train. Pinkerton dispatched an operative who boarded the train, and shortly after got aboard himself.
Excuse me, sir. This seat next to you taken?
Oh, no. No, it isn't.
I'll just sit down if you don't mind.
Sorry.
Nice smell the country has in the early morning, isn't it?
Smell? I don't smell anything. Jake. God, what is that smell?
Why, I was just
No,
saying...
I don't mean the country. Don't you smell perfume?
Perfume? No. I don't smell anything like that. I guess you're just imagining things.
There it is again. The perfume that he used. He's still here. He's with me. He's always with me, always.
Who is it that's with you all the time?
The man I killed.
Mr. Slocum, I arrest you in
No,
the name of the...
you can't follow me anymore.
Wait! Wait!
In that case, Pinkerton definitely established his method of using psychology in solving criminal cases. It illustrates his uncanny intuition, his lightning-like play of imagination, and his daring. These are qualities that go to make the born detective. But the real reason we are honoring Alan Pinkerton tonight is because of the part he played in saving the life of Abraham Lincoln, whose birthday the nation celebrates today. For Lincoln might not have been inaugurated in 1861 if it hadn't been for Alan Pinkerton. It's the most famous story of his career and begins in a smoky basement room in Baltimore shortly after Lincoln's election. A group of about 20 men are seated around a table in the dim glow of a single flickering gas jet.
Gentlemen, in a moment the room will be dark. There's a box already prepared containing a ballot for every man present. Whoever draws the red ballot will be the one chosen to perform the secret duty.
That choice will not be known, Captain Fernandino?
No one, not even among ourselves, will know his identity.
Are you sure that one man is enough for the task? We cannot afford to fail.
There are 8 ballots, the red ones. There are 20 of us. They are sworn to individual and collective secrecy. When we leave this room, a moment from now, there will be 8 men unknown to us and to each other who will be pledged to rescue the South. Gentlemen, I am about to put out the light. Are you all ready?
Yes, we're all ready.
I will now pass to each one of you the ballot box containing the marked wooden balls. Number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6, number 7. Number 16, number 17, number 18, number 19, number 20.
I'm back.
What happened, Davis?
I drew one of the red ballots myself.
Good. Our job now is to find out who drew the other 7.
That was the question. Who were the other 7? To arrest all of the 20 would have provoked an outbreak that it was best to avoid. But Abraham Lincoln's life must be saved. Mr. Lincoln was on his way to Washington to be inaugurated, and the danger to him would come when he passed through Baltimore. Pinkerton called on the president-elect in his suite at the Continental Hotel in Philadelphia and told him of the plot.
And do I understand, Mr. Pinkerton, that my life is chiefly threatened by this half-crazed foreigner?
Fernandino only talks like a maniac, Mr. President. The man is dangerous, and there are others.
But why? Why do they want to kill me?
It's impossible almost to explain to you, Mr. Lincoln. The fanatical hatred of you that we found. You must change trains when you go through Baltimore, sir. You will not be given an opportunity to defend yourself.
And my friends, those who are with me?
They'll be buried with you, sir.
I need hardly point out to you, Mr. Lincoln, the disastrous effect on the nation such a calamity would have. I do not put it on personal ground, but, sir, you must be inaugurated.
Yes. I'm not Abraham Lincoln any longer. I'm President of the United States. Gentlemen, I'm in your hands. What do you propose, Mr. Pinkerton?
To take you on to Washington this very night, Mr. President, before they are prepared.
Oh, I'm afraid that won't do. Tomorrow morning, I've promised to raise the flag over Independence Hall. After that, to visit the legislature at Harrisburg. Whatever the cost, those 2 promises I must fulfill.
And we'll see that you fulfill them, Mr. Lincoln. I am happy to be able to stand here today in the city of brotherly love at a time like this and with my own hands raise our flag over Independence Hall.
Harrisburg. After you visit the legislature here, Mr. President, we'll leave Harrisburg tonight instead of tomorrow. When we get back to Philadelphia again, we'll board the train for Washington.
Very well, Mr. Pinkerton. Driving across Philadelphia at night, it makes the city seem a little bigger than it looks in the daytime.
Did everything go well in Harrisburg, Mr. President?
Yes. The legislature gave me quite a reception. Well, here's the station. But where's my special train?
I got rid of it. That'd be a giveaway. We can't take any chances going through Baltimore. That's where the conspirators are. I reserved the last 3 sections of that sleeping car over there for an invalid.
An invalid?
Nobody must know it's for you, Mr. President.
Conductor. Yes, sir?
Will there be much delay in Baltimore for that western train that connects with us before we go on to Washington?
We just had a report. That train's 2 hours late, sir. You'll have to wait in Baltimore more than 2 hours. Oh, Mr. Pinkerton.
Mr. President, you'd better get back to your berth. It's dangerous you're coming out on the platform like this. You never can tell who might see you.
I got a mite worried. We've been in this Baltimore station a long time.
We're waiting for that train from the west to join up with us.
I wish it'd hurry up.
I think we're safe. The conspirators are looking for a big special train. We're a day or so ahead of your schedule anyway.
Oh, some of the passengers back there.
You're not worried, are you, Mr. Lincoln?
No. I think I'm in good hands, Mr. Pinkerton. No doubt there will be a great time in Dixie, by and by.
That's the train from the west. We'll be pulling out for Washington any minute, Mr. President.
Now you can get some sleep yourself, Mr. Pinkerton.
Mr. President, I won't sleep until this train gets you to Washington.
All's well.
Come ahead, Mr. Lincoln. Here you are in Washington, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Pinkerton. Are you leaving me here?
No, Mr. President. I'll be on the platform when you make your inaugural speech tomorrow.
I hold that in contemplation of universal law and of the Constitution, the union of these states is perpetual. Perpetuity is implied, if not expressed, in the fundamental law of all national governments. It is safe to assert that no government ever had a provision in its organic law for its own termination. Continue to execute all the express provisions of our national government, and the union will endure forever.
Alan Pinkerton and various of his operatives served with honor in the military intelligence during the Civil War. But when the Federal Secret Service was finally formed, he decided not to enter it. Instead, he remained with his own organization, whose symbol was and is an open eye, and whose motto still is, "We never sleep." The detective agency founded by the Glasgow barrel maker, Alan Pinkerton. And now Basil Rysdale with a story from the wonder world of chemistry.
My story of chemistry tonight answers a question that may be in your mind. Who will create the better things for better living 10, 25 years from now? This January, as in years past, the DuPont Company announced a continuation of special aid in the form of fellowships to promising postgraduate students of chemistry. Cash awards that enable these young graduates to pursue problems in research. 24 fellowships have been awarded for the academic year 1939-1940 in 18 colleges and universities to promote the advancement of science, to help train the chemists of tomorrow. The DuPont Fellowship Plan, which began 20 years ago, is marked by the fact that the colleges not only select the men who get the fellowships, but also select the research subject without any restriction. I was curious to hear something about a typical example of such research, and the young man who holds a DuPont Fellowship in the Chemistry Department of Columbia University came here tonight to tell us. His name is Donald C. Pease, and he's right on the other side of my microphone. Mr. Pease, would you mind telling us where your home is and how old you are?
Not at all, Mr. Rysdale. I'm 25 years old, and my home is in Honeoye Falls, New York.
And you graduated from?
From the University of Rochester. I'm working on my doctor's degree, doing postgraduate work at Columbia.
What kind of research are you doing?
I'm working on the isolation and chemical study of the toxic principles of certain species of loco-weed. I'm afraid that sounds a bit technical. By toxic, of course, I mean poisonous. These loco-weeds are poisonous. The ones we're working on grow in the Southwest, in western Texas, New Mexico, and Colorado. Many of them are species of wild asters. They creep into the pasture land, and when other forage is hard to find, they're eaten by livestock.
By cattle?
Yes, cattle and horses and sheep, too.
What does it do to them?
Well, they lose a great deal of weight. They get a kind of paralysis and nervous disorders, and finally they die. The yearly loss has been said to run into millions of dollars.
And your job?
Our job is to find out exactly what kind of poison it is that these local weeds contain. That may show what to do, what kind of treatment to give the cattle that are sick from eating the weeds.
How long do you think it'll take to get the answer?
I wish we knew, Mr. Rysdale. It's like hunting for a needle in a haystack, only worse, because in that case you'd at least know you were hunting for a needle. We're hunting for something that's absolutely unknown to us, and the only way we can find it is by eliminating hundreds of other substances. It's slow work, and we can't be impatient. However, I feel optimistic, because now I think we're on the right track.
Well, that sounds encouraging, and I wish you all the luck in the world. I'm sure the DuPont Company is proud to know that one of the DuPont Fellowships is being used for work that promises so much. A service to the farmer and a protection for America's food supply. What you're doing is another fine example of the way chemists in scientific institutions, as well as in industry, look constantly towards the goal described in the DuPont Pledge. Better things for better living through chemistry.
Next week, the Cavalcade of America will present the story of America's great frontier scout, Kit Carson. So until next week, then, at the same time, this is Thomas Chalmers saying good night and best wishes from DuPont.
This is the Columbia Broadcasting System.
Okay, I know that was a little disheveled in content, but after all, it was a true story. As I mentioned at the top, DuPont was the sponsor of Cavalcade of America. I also told you they created the show to improve their public image. But what was wrong with it? Well, the company had the reputation of profiting from death. They were a major supplier of gunpowder and dynamite, not to mention some other chemicals that I won't mention here. However, by the 1920s, DuPont changed its emphasis to materials science, hiring Wallace Carruthers to work on polymers in 1928. Carruthers invented neoprene, a synthetic rubber, the first polyester superpolymer, and in 1935, nylon. This change in focus meant a fresh new start for the company, hence their company motto, maker of better things for better living through chemistry. How about that? It's time now for some old-time radio commercials brought to you by Gladys Goodies. Good treats for your dog to eat. Men, have you ever used hair products? The Wild Root Company of Buffalo, New York, originally trademarked its Wild Root Hair Tonic in 1920. The product was marketed mainly to women to buy for their husbands. Early advertising claimed the hair tonic would cure dandruff, prevent balding, and produce thick, lustrous hair. It's still sold today, but now it's a cream and has no such claims other than it will keep your hair in place. How about that?
Get Wild Root Cream Oil, Charlie. It keeps your hair in trim. You see, it's non-alcoholic, Charlie. It's made with pseudolanolin. You better get Wild Root Cream Oil, Charlie. Start using it today. You'll find that you will have a tough time, Charlie. Keeping all those gals away. Hiya, Baldy. Get a bottle right away. Your druggist has it. A little goes a long, long way. You hear it screaming. Keeps you looking neat all day.
Do you like your beer? Well, one of the early beers was Lucky Lager. This American beer was created and distributed by the Pabst Brewing Company. It originally launched in 1934 by the San Francisco-based General Brewing Company. It grew to be one of the prominent beers of the West during the 1950s and 1960s.
Lucky beer, premium beer, Lucky premium beer, so lively, get lucky, swing to exciting beer flavor.
Finest ingredients, aged for flavor. That's Lucky Lager, flavor that's entertaining, enthusiastic, a very exciting beer.
Lucky beer, premium beer, Lucky premium beer.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that little trip into the past. I know I did. Well, that's another podcast, and its number was 630. This time I want to thank Robert Little, Grub81, and Bram Ireland for their stories today. I really liked them. If you want to follow the podcast or the blog, head to ronsamazingstories.com. There you will find any of the links I mentioned and how to contact us. Do you want to help the show? The best thing you can do is to tell your friends all about it, and please leave reviews or feedback wherever you listen. Clicking that follow or like button helps us grow. Thank you for listening, and I hope you come again to find out what are Ron's Amazing Stories.
All of the vintage audio used in the podcast is believed to be in the public domain. Ron's Amazing Stories does not own the rights to any of the old-time radio used here. If you hold the rights to any of the shows played, please contact us immediately at ronsamazingstories.com.